Well, we might get started. Hello, everybody. Fantastic to see everybody starting to turn up. I might use these first few minutes to say hello, of course, and to give an opportunity for our final panelists to get their camera on. But most importantly, welcome each and every one of you to Create New South Wales Conversation, Create Ideas, 24-hour economy, recharging Sydney's creative capital. My name's Fenella Kernebone. I'm really pleased to be your MC today. And to talk about today's economy, big 24-hour economy conversation. But before, of course, we continue, I would firstly like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands where we all live, work and share ideas, where we might in fact be spending most of our time at the moment during lockdown. So I pay my respects to the traditional custodians. I'm on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are here with us today. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. If you wanted to share where you happen to be in New South Wales or in this country, it would be wonderful to see where you happen to be and what land you are on as well. So thank you for joining us. You might have noticed that the webinar is being recorded. So hello everybody again. This webinar is going to be published on the Create New South Wales website. I know Tracy might mention it a few times in the chat, but if you could please put your microphones on mute if you're not one of the panelists, that would be great. And also turn your cameras off if you're not one of the panelists as well. That would be remarkable. But yeah, if you want to ask a question at any point, I would love your questions, because I bet you know about this a whole lot more than I do in some ways, and I know our panelists do as well. So your questions are going to be really important, and we would love to hear your questions throughout. And I know that Kerry and Carla and Lisa will probably be glancing over at the chat function too, and maybe they'll see something that will spark a bit of inspiration for them as well. So if you have a question for anybody, please throw your questions into the chat function, and we'll get to that towards the sort of the end of the conversation and throughout too. So yeah, again, welcome to you. It's great to have your company wherever you're joining us today. And I know this is going to be a panel that will generate a whole lot of conversation. The Sydney 24-hour economy strategy was launched in September 2020, and as I'm sure you know, there are really big changes underway to recharge Sydney as a global beacon of culture and entertainment and vibrancy, following the impacts of the lockout laws and the COVID pandemic. So these changes are going to be heralding a new chapter with live music, venues, restaurants, theatres, shops, cinemas and cultural institutions that are helping to lead a revitalised economy. So just to be clear at the top, the panel of this conversation this afternoon is not focusing on the details of how the industry will manage the next phase of the COVID pandemic. Create New South Wales is actually holding other webinars and providing information in other forums. So do keep looking at the Create New South Wales website for more information on that. But today we really are hoping to focus on and discuss how we can normalise the narrative around the 24-hour economy to be about safety and about vibrancy and about community, and what happens when we position arts, screen and culture as a priority to drive this 24-hour economy, which to me sounds absolutely wonderful. Again, we want to highlight the role that arts and culture plays in a vibrant and diverse 24-hour economy, and really think about existing ways and new ways that arts and culture can operate in this space. And it's, of course, particularly resonant in this week. I don't know about you guys, but it was really wonderful to be able to stay up after 6 o'clock and for the lights to, you know, the sun's still to be out, and to go and have a picnic with some friends, and to know that soon lockdown might be over too. So I hope you guys all had an opportunity to get outside and get some fresh air and some sunlight. So thank you to all of you who sent your questions in already. Again, we want to hear from you, so send those questions in as soon as you can, whenever you like. So let's get to it. Hello to our two speakers that we can currently see. Hello, Kerry, and hello, Carla. Great to see you. Also joining us is Lisa Havilah as well. I'll introduce each of you guys, and then you can pop your microphones on. But Carla is here, Carla Thunderson. She's recently been appointed Senior Manager, Place Activation and Strategy for Sydney Olympic Park. within the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. Prior was acting director, Parramatta Artist Studios and City Animation for the City of Parramatta. Extensive career, of course, across many different avenues and spaces within the creative sector. And I know you can look up her bio online. She is a legend. Welcome, Carla. It's great to see you. How are you?
Good, and just cursing the fact that I always get ridiculously long titles.
Yeah. Well, look, it's good. It gives me something to talk about. Did you have a good weekend?
Yeah, I did. It was lovely and so good to welcome daylight saving. It was fantastic to get that extra bit of light at the end of the day. It's really nice.
What a relief it was. Also joining us is Kerry Glascock, who is the founding co-director of Venue 505 and the award-winning Old 505 Theatre. She's worked in a whole range of roles in the Sydney arts scene as a performer, director, a theatre practitioner, and in 2013, she was appointed as CEO and Festival Director of the Sydney Fringe Festival. It's grown from a small community event to the largest independent arts festival in New South Wales. Kerry, you've also got a much longer bio, so you also are clearly a legend. It's great to have your company. How are you?
You're great, thanks, Fenella.
I'm very happy to see you as well.
It says that I'm not on mute.
Oh, this is an interesting program, this one. It's good to see you and thanks for joining. Did you have a good weekend then, Kerry?
I had a great weekend. It was my first kind of weekend off in, I reckon, since March 2020, all through COVID, so it was great.
I love that story. This is fantastic. Finally, Lisa Havilah is also joining us as well. She is the Chief Executive of the Powerhouse Museum, and she has, through her visionary leadership, helped to establish a new museum paradigm for one of Australia's oldest and most important cultural institutions. Of course, you will know her from her work as the Director of Carriage Works from 2012 to 2019. And prior to that, when I first met her, and I think I interviewed her when I was just a young one in my late 20s, she was the Director of Campbelltown Arts Centre as well. Hello, Lisa, are you there?
Hello, Fenella, I'm here and we're trying to get the camera to work, so hopefully we'll have a breakthrough very shortly. Great to be with you.
Well, you know what? It's great to have you here too. And how are you? How was your weekend? Well, we start off with the preliminary hellos.
It was actually good. I did some work, but I also drank wine in a park, which was fantastic. I haven't done that. I don't think I've done that since I was very young. So
there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, so we've got lots of questions. Again, if you have questions that you would like to ask our panelists, please do. The chat function's there on the right, and I will try and get to as many as possible. I'm gonna throw each of you three very big questions to start with. So we'll probably come back and talk about a few of these things as the conversation goes on. But we'll just kind of get into it. So feel free to talk just for a minute or two to these questions. But Lisa, I might start with you. One of the strategic pillars of the strategy looks to increase state and local government and industry collaboration to build an environment in which the 24-hour economy can thrive. So can you tell us, to start with, some of your thoughts on how a cultural institution like the Powerhouse Museum is going to exist in a 24-hour economy?
Sure. So I think one of the things that has to change in terms of thinking about all of this cultural infrastructure that, sits right across the state, but, right across Sydney, is, how it's utilised in terms of, opening at 10 o'clock and closing at 5 o'clock, I don't think is an okay thing anymore. We really need to look at how we can, use these amazing spaces and program into them in a much longer period of time. So, opening earlier, closing later, actively investing and contributing to a nighttime program that supports artists and artist development and, engaging audiences and shifting the way that we sort of go out as well. So I think there is a huge role for cultural institutions to play, but cultural infrastructure more broadly in terms of how it's utilised.
Okay, great. Well, I'm sure we'll be able to unpack that in more detail, and I know Kerry and Carla will certainly have some ideas to share with that as well. Thank you, Lisa. Kerry, maybe I'll throw to you now as sort of from the Sydney Fringe Festival's perspective, one of the largest independent arts festivals in New South Wales. You represent artists and, of course, small independent companies. Is it 450 events that you do across Greater Sydney each year? I mean, that's absolutely mammoth. So really, quite broadly, how does the Sydney Fringe and in turn independent artists, tell me a bit about how this can contribute to the vision of a future for a 24-hour economy from your perspective, Kerry?
I think this is the most exciting time for my part of the sector that we've ever seen in Sydney, full stop, certainly in my lifespan. What we've seen with this strategy, I think it's really interesting to look back at what led up to the creation of this strategy when we're talking about it. And for, we come out of years of being strangled by lockout laws. We had decades of prohibitive regulation. We've battled gentrification and rising costs, and we had 4 government inquiries into the state of our sector and the 24-hour economy or lack thereof. And so it marked a real shift in the government's thinking and valuing of what we do and our contribution to not only the broader economy, but the lives of our citizens and also the global reputation of our country and our city. And so this strategy marked for me really an optimistic moment for small to mediums because it coincided with a huge regulatory reform sweep that happened at the end of last year, which was the liquor bill reforms. So this document of a full strategy, an overarching strategy, combined with a set of regulations that swept away 500 pieces of outdated regulation to actively now encourage arts and entertainment into all sorts of building types is a really exciting place to be. So for me, I think for the independents and the small to mediums, the entrepreneurs, the people who want to open their own spaces, the rough and the ready, it's a really exciting time.
It is exciting. I'm excited even just talking about it in the first 10 minutes. So thank you. Thank you, Kerry. We'll unpack that more, of course, as we go on in more detail. I hope you can remember everything you said and say it again in a slightly more exciting way and just all of the above. Make it lots of fun because it's all about a creative 24-hour economy. Carla, for you, arts, screen and culture is a key driver to a sustainable 24-hour economy that is responsive to local character, that increases audience participation, produces economic opportunities for communities statewide. And as we know, Western Sydney are leaders in celebrating and reflecting local communities through arts and culture. So talk to me a little bit about how this will work for you and how important community-driven and connected events will be for Western Sydney, in Western Sydney, as we look to this 24-hour economy.
I'm in my 3rd week of a job at Sydney Olympic Park, so I am 3 weeks into working for the state government. So, and I've just come from the city of Parramatta. So, but my whole career path's really been focused on audiences and on delivering art and culture to larger communities, much like Kerry and Lisa. So, but in my particular new role, and I'm still grappling with it because I am so new, one of the biggest things I think I'm thinking about is the utilisation of public assets and public domain to support, enhance and drive arts and culture. So, I mean, I've got an area that's actually the size of the CBD. I heard the other day. I did not realise Sydney Olympic Park was that big, but it's enormous. And it's full of fantastic kind of places. So for me, it's about making great use of those currently, in quite a few instances, underutilised assets and making sure that I can fit as much arts and culture as I can into them, basically.
There's a lot to do there. I grew up out in Homebush, so it's a very large space, and there's a lot that you can find and you can do out there, certainly. So let's talk kind of big picture, and thank you again for your sort of opening kind of gambit. It's a big conversation, so maybe we can start quite broadly. I'm actually quite curious just to see, and I know you touched on this already, but what's changed as a result of COVID? What's changed in the city for you and in your experience and in your communities? I suppose the difference between what happened last year and where we are today, the Delta strain, the lockdown, where we've been at right now. Maybe Carla, if we could begin with you, what have you seen and how has COVID changed the city for you and your experience?
If I can just talk personally, I mean, I think like everybody else, I haven't been going very far out of my local suburb, and that has highlighted to me probably is just how little there is to do in my suburb. So I think, like everyone, localism has just suddenly become very important to all of us, and having good places to go that are in our own LGAs. And that, for me, causes a reflection on the infrastructure that we have available to, to creatives to use in our local LGAs and how much work could be done in that area. So COVID has been a big wake-up call for me about the fact that, you need to give access to people across Sydney to arts and culture, and it makes me think about the areas that are weakest in that and the areas that are strongest in that and what my part should be in that, basically.
Kerry, what do you think? How about for you, as someone who puts on 450 events across Greater Sydney? How has it shifted in your view?
Or doesn't, as the last 2 years would have.
100%, yes.
Look, everything has changed since COVID, and I'm actually, look at me being the eternal optimist both times, but I'm actually really excited about that. I'm excited that at the moment we have an opportunity to examine the structures that were existing and that had been here for ages. So I'm in the kind of camp of, let's not go back to normal. As soon as I sit around a round table and people are saying, when we get back to normal, I'm like, no. For the arts and cultural sector, and particularly for the small to mediums and almost everyone, let's be honest, normal actually wasn't working, and it wasn't functioning in a sustainable and viable or democratic and inclusive way. So I think we've got this fantastic opportunity now to actually have the hard conversations, and they are confronting, but to really examine how we can rebuild into the future in a new and wonderful way, because what used to work isn't ever going to work again, and let's just embrace that now and just do something completely new. So yeah, I think everything's changed, and I'm pushing for more to change.
So the opportunity that has allowed us is to take what we had that was great, but actually rebuild it in a way that is equitable, that brings arts and culture to the fore, that gives an opportunity to do it, just to do it better, essentially. It's not resetting to zero. What would you say it is, Kerry? What else is the look that we're looking for?
Well, I think it's re-examining the models. For the large part of the arts and culture sector, we worked on a deficit model that wasn't sustainable, and for the majority of artists who don't work in the funded sector, all the risk was borne by the artist or the venues, and that just can't happen anymore. So we have to now find a way forward where there's a truly equitable shared risk model, and that really excites me, because it's also about artists and it's about audiences sharing the risk too, about paying the true value of what things cost. It's about everyone living in a more kind of sustainable and equitable way. But to do that, we have to be all on board, the whole sector. So we have to have those big conversations together that can make lasting change. But it's exciting, I think, and we've had a reset. It's like a button's been reset.
I like this button. Lisa, what about for you, considering the sort of the role of cultural institutions? How has COVID sort of altered the way that you might think about the role of a big institution can operate in the city, and what you can do looking to the future?
I think for me it's an increased level of responsibility and accountability in terms of what cultural institutions, how they should participate. Really, I suppose, just supporting what Kerry's saying is that, collaboration is the way forward, and, the hierarchies that sit around, arts and culture and how we work, I think they're the things that need to be completely broken down so we can collaborate in different ways in terms of how we invest and how we present and, what we present and, the rules around what we're doing. And I think if COVID does give us something, I hope that it gives us the ability to break more rules in terms of, I was trying to be funny about drinking wine in a park, but hopefully all of those things we'll realise that there's rules and structures around arts and culture, not only hierarchy, but what we can do with it and how to do it, that can really be dissolved and recreated.
And I think that's the opportunity that this 24-hour economy offers us. So maybe, and you've already touched on a few of these ideas already, Carla and Kerry and Lisa, but let's talk about what it will look like. What can the 24-hour economy really look like when we integrate arts and culture into everything that we do, not just the 10 to 5 that you talked about before, but it's something that can be at different pockets of our time, which is to me a remarkable. It's a wine in the park, it's whatever it happens to be in our local community. So Carla, I'd love to start with you. You talked about infrastructure before. Oh, Lisa, it's so nice to see you. Let's wave at Lisa. Hello.
Sorry, that was like that took
Very happy now.
more skill than outside my ability. Hello.
It's really good. But what does it look like, Carla, for you? Let's talk all together. I'd love each of you just to interact as you need to. I mean, what does the 24-hour really look like when we do integrate arts and culture into everything that we do, when culture is in fact the driver? Carla, what's your thoughts?
I'm thinking about community-led culture, and something I've been chatting with my friends and family about a lot is, you know, when I was kind of in my 20s and 30s, I was doing quite a bit of clubbing. So, you know, there was a reason for me to go out late. And I'm thinking about clubbing and actually the importance of youth-led culture being critical to driving the other end of the 24-hour economy, you know. And I don't know, I just don't think enough flags are flown for that kind of, that part of our world, our culture, the way we are. And I'm thinking about the places that I love to visit, where people participate and do music themselves, you know. So thinking about lots and lots of participation, people-led arts and culture. And that kind of fits with my new job, you know, which is in a very public precinct with lots of parklands. So for me, that's going to be my kind of core driver, is community-led culture, essentially.
And
which is not to
and
say
local
that,
as well.
And local, which is not to say that I won't fit as many artists and creatives into that budget as I can, but my driver will be community.
And Lisa, for you, having come from, say, Carriageworks, now at the Powerhouse Museum, big cultural institution, you know, Carla talked about youth and community-led culture, but what about for you? What does a 24-hour economy look like with your sort of your hat on, when it is culture is in fact the driver for what this future might be or will be?
Yeah, I think it is, you know, really investing in programming over that longer period of time within that 24-hour focus, but also working through opportunities in terms of how we actually get return from that in terms of retail and retail experiences, and how, you know, the creative economy and creative industries, you know, it's not just arts and culture. There's like, you know, such incredible creativity around, you know, what we eat, how we experience, you know, what we drink, all of those things. And yeah, Sydney is, you know, really great at that, but it's how we bring those things together to really reinforce those experiences, but to support broader industries as well. So I really see that sort of breaking down of silos between arts and culture and, you know, broader experiences. You know, Kerry does that beautifully. But I think that's, you know, something that that we can really apply across the board, especially for cultural institutions as well. But I totally agree with Carla, like context is everything. And, you know, people want to engage with, you know, stories that are driven by the community, like first-hand storytelling. And, you know, there's a real hunger for that. So if we can bring that together with, you know, those broader experiences around recreation and going out and experiencing arts and culture, if they can all be in the one sentence, that's like a good night out, from my point of view.
So exactly, I think the term silos and not having silos is a really good way to think about it. That we are able to integrate it. It's not, you know, I might have gone out clubbing in my younger years, or maybe I still do it. You'll never know. But that I still might actually want to go out and not just have a drink, but go and see theatre, or, you know, go do something somewhere, and for it to not just be in the sort of the 10 to 5 kind of bracket. Kerry, what are your thoughts? I mean, I suppose what is it that we can do right now under the sort of the planning reforms, and why is this strategy going to be so important in time? Give us your perspective.
Yeah, I really hope what comes with it is a dismantling of the consumption of destination culture, where you have to go somewhere to experience a single thing, and often that's not in your local area, or travel to head into the CBD or whatever. I hope that it's a move to an everyday culture where it's just embedded in everyday life, where high streets have small theatres and venues, and where there's weekend activations by local community, and where, like Lisa's saying, it's just embedded into the everyday, be it a food experience or an art or a cultural experience, but it just becomes everyday. And we actually can do that now, and I think that's one of the most incredible things about the reforms that happened at the same time that the strategy was written. So essentially, it made what was pure fantasy, in a red tape strangled New South Wales, not only possible but actually achievable now. And so, it means that anything that you as a creative person can imagine you want to do, you can now do it. And that's like, let's put on a show at a hairdresser, which I tried many years ago and was told I couldn't do. Or, music no longer has to be in a licensed over 18s venue, and theatre doesn't have to be in a black box theatre. Now, any kind of building can be activated into performance. It's much easier to get any type of activity out on the street and all of those sorts of things. So for that, your imagination is the key. We can do whatever we like now, legally, within reason, but it is actually easier to do it. I think the big questions for me now is, are we utilising these reforms front and centre of the strategy actions moving forward? Because if we're not, that's a really big missed opportunity. And how are they being communicated to everybody as well? Do we know what we can do now, and how is that being communicated to councils and to other cultural institutions and to the sector and to business owners and artists, so that they can let their imaginations run wild? But yes, I hope that we have an everyday culture where it's just there, embedded in your everyday activity.
Is it worth talking to those 2 points that you just raised, which is, how are we utilising these reforms right now, and how are they being communicated across the sector? So, Carla, and Lisa, how are we utilising these reforms at the present time? Is there enough happening? What are your thoughts, Carla?
Unlike Kerry, I'm not working in venues and inside other premises on a kind of day-to-day basis. So from a kind of an outsider to that perspective, I would say it's not broadly communicated enough, the reforms, to either the sector or to local government. And I think that's step number one. But then I think, if there's a place for government within that, it's piloting, so that people become aware that these things can occur, and investing in programs that pilot those sorts of activities. So I think there's a lot more room for communicating and doing things differently.
Yeah.
Lisa?
And I think there's some great piloting work that, Mike Rodriguez and the 24-hour economy team are doing around this sort of idea of local districts, where local business owners and artists and can get together on a local level and create this sort of broader experience of a night out. And that really goes, I suppose, to what Kerry was saying, is that if you can get every type of experience in a local area, and that there's collaboration on a local level, I think it it makes it more interesting and more distinctive as an experience.
Maybe you could talk a bit about what that might mean. You talked about a broader experience about what a night out might actually be. And obviously, if we're thinking about our local communities, that can be a different thing depending on who you are and where you live. So what are some, and you touched on, a few ideas before, Kerry, but what are some of the other ways that we can think about cultural activities in our cities and in our local areas? What are some other things that are already happening that can be replicated elsewhere? Kerry, your thoughts?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. What can we do? One of the things we do at Sydney Fringe is, I suppose, we do this in a kind of really condensed and amplified way. each September, where we identify high streets, we identify communities, we bring together existing cultural activity or venues around clusters of spaces, and then layer over the top of that with local kind of partnerships. Really is essentially the fringe model. So I think we're seeing similar things roll out with really great results. Live and Local, which Create New South Wales fund, which is a statewide program that they run with councils, where it's kind of placing live music into high streets and shop fronts. I think utilising existing infrastructure is a thing I'm really big on. This idea of, if you are able to utilise a shop front or a restaurant or a vacant premises or a space that already has some type of infrastructure, then your budgets can go to paying artists. You know, one of the big things that we encounter as event operators often is that you're spending the bulk of your budget on, you know, water barriers and security guards and fencing and infrastructure, and artists have the very small part of it. So I think this idea of flipping that around, using existing infrastructure, unutilised space. I loved what Lisa and Carla were both saying before around this idea of sweating assets, particularly public owned assets. I think there's real opportunity for that in the future as well. And I'd love to see more of that, of all sorts of events and activities happening in unusual spaces.
Carla, you came up with some really interesting kind of proposals on this kind of similar topic, which is about trying to think about how we can use these spaces, like Kerry was just talking about, in different ways, even how developers might be approached to consider the disused or the less used spaces within shopping centres or other places like that. What are some of your thoughts on this subject?
I've got lots. The first thing is that we just actually bought a container, and this actually, I can't claim any credit for this. This happened before I started, but we're about to start programming in a container that's just a little plug and play unit. So it's got, it's got backline, it's got a mixing desk, it's got a little PA in it, and we can move it around for $300. So I'm pretty happy about that. So we've got a little immediate facility whereby artists can come and perform in our parklands, or, next to the stadiums, or whatever kind of location suits particular times in our calendar. Having just come from a local council context, I see the struggle of trying to get developers to contribute to creative infrastructure through our existing legislation, which is very, very fraught. But I also see lots of opportunity in areas like retail, because it is struggling broadly, and it was struggling even before COVID, right? So I think all of those kind of vacant retail premises that you see below apartment buildings, I think it's about just inventive approaches to partnering with developers on those kinds of disused sites. And I know, Kerry, you're pretty much the expert, I think, in doing that kind of work. But I also think of malls, malls and Westfields and those kinds of organisations of large, deep pockets. I think how we work with those kinds of organisations, and when I say we, I don't mean my government we, I mean my creative sector we, with entities like that, to do the kind of things that drive what they want, which is essentially feet through the door, because that's what makes money for them. So I think there's a bit of onus on us as well as a sector to be creative, to be commercial, to talk to the big scary kind of organisations and developers. And I think there's a place for local government in facilitating that. And that's not easy, because it lives somewhere between planning, who, have got their hands full just trying to get the regulatory reforms done, things like harmonisation and that kind of a really deep planning and regulatory work. So, and not many councils are equipped with the kind of staffing levels required to do that. So there's a kind of a ground in between the sector and the planning world and local government world where help is needed, I think, and maybe that's about Create and funders working together to identify people who can fill that gap. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, and way more long-winded than I thought it would be.
It was very good though. Lisa, do you have anything to add to that, and Kerry as well?
I think it's interesting what Carla's saying about regulation, because, activation and, presenting work costs money. And I've always thought, there's a lot of regulation around, investment into public art, which I'm not against. I love public art. But if there can be a restructuring of how those developer investments are leveraged into other things, including, spaces, under tall residential buildings, as well as into actually ongoing arts and cultural programs, it would actually make, local areas more interesting and create an ongoing sort of sustained creative ecology around those developments. And so I think there needs to be a shift around that, instead of like running towards public art to make places better, actually run more encouraging or shifting that sort of developer responsibility into investing directly into artists. And I think that also plays.
It's not just a plonking an artwork in the middle of a space. It's thinking more holistically about a long-term vision for that community that's beyond just a physical work. Yeah, a place, making place.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, not only that needs to be rethought, but we need to rethink, affordable housing and, how, affordable housing is very much thought about for, frontline workers, which of course it should be, but we also need to think about affordable housing for, artists and the creative economy as well, because one of the things that is going to happen if we don't do that is that the centre of the city is going to become more and more uninteresting and unactivated, because it will take artists and, creative industry, in being in the city for it to actually work as a 24-hour economy. So we have to protect space, but we also have to protect places for people to live in as well.
Kerry, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'd love to pick up on Carla's points around developers and the opportunity there. And I think one big thing that we need to do is to redefine what cultural space is in those conversations. Because I think often developers feel like they need to build a 2,000-seat theatre or a massive studio complex or something. When I speak to developers, I'm like, no, we just want like a concrete shell with 3-phase power and water. Like really, and a certain ceiling height where you could put a light in. And so I think really having those conversations where you redefine what is a cultural space and how that can be utilised within a community is really important to unlock some of that space, because you do see it. You see all those developments with the empty retail space downstairs that's just never going to get leased out, or maybe at best be a 7-Eleven, that could be prime space for community space and art making or cultural space of some kind. So I think there's an opportunity there in just the language that we use around what facilities do we need and what is cultural space.
That's
often the less in it, the better. Concrete spaces to me scream opportunity. Rather than, you must put a medical centre or a hairdresser here sort of thing, It's such if only we could get in those conversations earlier, I think. Would be
that's a very good point. How can that happen, and how can these, if we're talking about this next step, which is a 24-hour economy, then those conversations do need to happen earlier in order for it to be achieved. So maybe we could have a bit of a chat about some of those steps in order to actually make that happen. I mean, one side of way of thinking about it is how artists and designers potentially can be part of that conversation themselves, but also those that are the administrators and the arts leaders too. So maybe, I don't know, Lisa, maybe just to start with you, because you sort of seen both camps. What are your thoughts?
About changing rules?
How can we be part of the conversation in order to design these spaces so that they can be utilised, to have those conversations earlier?
I think that also comes to like the siloing, around government, in terms of not only like, me from a New South Wales government perspective, places and precincts need to be created in a collaborative way, working across departments. And I know that is happening more and more, and I know Create's playing a big role in that. But also it needs to happen, destructured in terms of collaboration across state and local government as well. So I think, it's the principles around, placemaking, which is a very overused term, but it's really thinking about how we implement a broader arts and cultural strategy for the city, and then how that plays out in terms of making sure that that's embedded in infrastructure and in places. And, the Greater Sydney Commission around, the 3-city plan, there was a lot of work done around, how do we make sure that we're keeping these large paddocks in Western Sydney? So, well, not large paddocks or large spaces, so at least we can do live music for 10,000 people. Like, spaces like that need to be protected and thought about as well. So we do need to think expansively, but make sure that arts and culture is at the table, at the front of that type of strategic thinking, not the sort of back end, which it currently is at the moment, but it needs to be looked at as something that will actually bring capital and deliver capital in an ongoing, sustained way.
100%. Kerri, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's also a missing level between government, developers and the sector. Like there's a matchmaking service that needs to be there, or something where people are put in contact with the right people to talk to as well. I've had a number of experiences where developers have contacted me because they know that Fringe does that, works in that space, that have said, we reached out to council and we didn't, we said we wanted to have, we've got a space, we wanted artists go in and we weren't believed, or they didn't take it seriously, or they, like these sorts of things. One of the most successful partnerships we had with a big developer that ended up going for 2 years and providing a lot of space just happened to be because their marketing manager was in the cafe and picked up our, festival guide. And was like, oh, this looks fun. So I think there's, there is a missing link there between the worlds of reaching the right people in industry and the sector who understand how to activate and can connect with creative community as well. And yeah, there's a missing link that hasn't been filled yet, that I think there's probably a government to set up or establish or help to create that.
And there is precedent of that overseas too. I was going to say, Fenella, there's organisations like Artscape in Toronto, and I can't remember what they're called. Is it Cast in London? But they bridge the world of developers and the sector, the creative sector. They do it very well in such a way that benefits the developers as well, because they get these kind of cool precincts and districts that sells them lots and lots of apartments, essentially. So there is,
but it's an arts and culture driver first before everything else. That's the starting point. Is that right? Yeah,
I'm thinking of Artscape. Probably is the one I know the most of, because the CEO of that organisation came over to Sydney and presented here, and I was part of a group that ran a workshop actually for local councils on that very topic, and they have developed, I think it was something like 14 different precincts that were culture led for developers, and like the most successful and very first one that I can remember was like an old distillery precinct that they then turned into a mix of community, creative and residential, because there's got to be, they've got to get that financial return. But they just made it such I can't remember the name of it now, but somebody in the chat might know. Lisa Colley, I'm thinking of you maybe, and Amanda Buckland, maybe you can help me out. But they did a fantastic job of turning it into a place that people really wanted to go to visit and to live. And I think that's what we need, the matchmakers. And I think we've got people with those skills here. It's just about, giving them the resource to do it, the infrastructure, the offices, the small amount of budget to be that matchmaker, to work with councils, to work with the sector, to bridge the gaps. And, software helps, doing databases, connecting people. I think City of Sydney's done it well with that the Creative Spaces program, that was a fantastic kind of brokership initiative. So we've got a little bit of track record in it. We just need to get bigger and bolder.
We need to matchmake the matchmakers, maybe, in order for them to connect. Would that be right? Lisa, did you have anything to add?
No, I totally agree. I was just, as Carla was talking, I was just thinking of some great examples that have happened, like the Frasers development that's just up the road here in Ultimo, and just the incredible sort of opportunity that development gave in providing space to creatives for like a very extended period of time, which I think really helped create that as a place. So
for sure.
there are great examples.
Big international examples and other sort of industries we can think about as well. What about safety, sort of access, inclusion within the 24-hour economy? And I know we're talking about arts and culture, but culture more broadly, which can be opening up late at night, and food options, and many different types of ways of thinking about what a late night economy is all about, and how they can all exist in harmony, which I think is really great. But maybe we could talk a bit about this. Like, how can we change the way that we position that conversation about safety and access and inclusion within the 24-hour economy? What has perhaps hijacked this conversation in the past, and how can we move it to where we would like it to be? Kerry, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the hijacking of the past, I think we have moved on from that, and I think we've learned a lot as a city post-lockout laws around how we talk about arts and cultural activity and nighttime economy. And I think the world is a different place. And I think one of the things that solves a lot of those issues is the integration of arts and culture, authentically community-led culture, because we know they build community and build safety. One of the things I'm thinking about a lot at the moment around a true 24-hour economy is women's safety in our cities. And I think that we've got a long way to go with addressing that more than half of our population don't feel safe, past 8 or 9 o'clock at night, walking around their communities. So I think there's a big piece of work to be done around that in the coming years with this strategy. I'd love to see that front and centre in all kind of decision-making processes. From everything from, lighting and how we get around to how vibrant the streets are and how many people are around. But I think we have a long way to go in Sydney on that.
Carla?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. My personal challenge is going to be that if everything that I contribute to in terms of program and content is something that is safe and fun and inclusive for an 18-year-old girl and her friends, then I will have succeeded in my job. It's that simple, and that's how I'd explain it to, when I've worked in local government, and I've worked with guys who've got underutilised public domain areas in dodgy bits, and they go, we should just build a skate park here. And I would say things like to them, like, okay, think about a 14-year-old girl or an 18-year-old girl and think, would she come to this place if you do what you've got in your head? And if the answer to that was no, then I'd say to them, okay, so then your challenge is to rethink it so that they would be safe and that's somewhere that they would go. So it's quite simple, really. It's, that's everything from lighting to how do they get there to what are they doing when they get there.
And I suppose the interesting thing about it is if it is a 24-hour economy and there are more places that are open, then the capacity to actually go somewhere and be amongst people after hours after dark will also sort of facilitate some of that to be safer for all of us in some ways. Lisa, did you have anything to add in terms of safety or access and inclusion, and just in terms of sort of building a bigger cultural institution in Parramatta and in that space there too, in Western Sydney? What are your perspectives?
I think it's like grouping. I think it goes back to that neighbourhood or the district and that grouping of activity in terms of, then through collaboration together through, a cultural institution working with, other places around it or the other way around, you can create like a district of a safe place. But I think it is going to be, a big issue, particularly in the next couple of months, because people are going to come out of this lockdown and just like there's a certain level of potential nihilism around it that people could just, they'll be very, not not know what to do with the level of freedom that they have. So I do think that there is some quite urgent thinking to be done around it. But I think it is just embedding a different type of experience. But yeah, Kerry's right. We totally have moved on from the different type of lockdown that happened around the nighttime economy, and I think everyone is feeling completely optimistic in terms of driving a new type of nighttime experience and a much more diverse type of nighttime experience for people.
You're optimistic, obviously, Lisa, about what's happening in this future. I'm optimistic. I can't wait to get out of lockdown and go out and do more than just have a glass of wine in a park, but maybe see some theatre, maybe eat some noodles, in a food truck or something like that that's open after 10 o'clock. There's all this future that we can look to. Just noticing that James, and thank you all, by the way, for the comments in the chat function. There's some really great links that are being posted there right now. So James Hume has just posted that the Office of the 24-Hour Economy is working with the Greater Sydney Commission on women's safety via the Women's Safety Charter, which leads me to a kind of a couple of audience questions that have been coming through. So we're going to start with some audience questions right now, and of course, Kerry, Carla, Lisa, if there's anything that you can't answer, I'm sure that you'll be able to answer it later, or someone in the chat function from Create New South Wales will be able to as well. But one question that did come in earlier was the 24-hour economy, which kind of leads into the conversation we just talked about just then about safety, etc. But the 24-hour economy is very tied to the state's handling of patrons on the streets and in the clubs and bars. Will there be a different approach on policing and regulation to achieve a vibrant scene? And how can we contribute to this? It's a big question. Kerry, I'm going to see what your thoughts are on this, having put on some late night events in your time.
My thought is there's going to have to be. And, I go back to my earlier comments around we have to have some confronting and big conversations altogether about if we really want to achieve, the cities and the towns that we want to live in, that this ambitious strategy says we do. I look at it, I think the COVID recovery is a good example, right? We have a commitment from up the top that we want to get our cities and our streets vibrant again. And that means that all the agencies involved need to have a number one KPI, that is, we're getting things going. Now, that might mean that for a while, or possibly, heaven forbid, forever, we make a bit of move on noise restrictions, and we have some movement on other restrictions. We can drink in parks all of a sudden when we couldn't do that. Right? So to make seismic change, everyone needs to get on board. It's undeniable and it is indisputable in Sydney in particular that we have a history of and a environment where there is heavy policing and where responsibility is put onto people as opposed to people taking responsibility, I suppose is what I'm trying to say, is an enforcement culture. And that will have to shift if we really truly want to have a vibrant and dynamic city. What I would hope is that comes naturally from the ground up through demonstration, and that can only happen through diversity of content, which is what Lisa was saying before, where the content is driven through collaborative communities, through local communities, and where the activity is by nature diverse, because you don't get then the type of activity or events that occur that require that sort of policing. So I would say, yes, it has to change. And I would also say to really achieve this strategy and the vision that we have, there needs to be full collaboration across agencies, and everyone needs to have the same mission statement of what they want to achieve from that.
Carla, nodding vigorously, which means you get to go next. What are your thoughts in response to what Kerry is talking to? Because it's interesting too, because as we know, the 24-hour strategies moved beyond, reform, regulatory reform and alcohol-related issues. It's moved into something else, cafes, bars, restaurants, artistic institutions, etc. So what are your thoughts to this point?
Well, it's cultural, no pun intended, change within our rule makers and enforcers, I suppose that's one big challenge. And, you know, I've confronted that when working in local councils and advocating for certain activities and hearing that it would not be looked upon well by the police, for example. So I think that there is still an educational, cultural change piece of work to be done, because you can't, I mean, the strategy is one thing, getting people to behave differently is another thing. And then I suppose, I mean, I work in a precinct where safety is a huge part of the culture because it's big events, you know, so a lot of our operations and culture is driven around safety. So that will be an ongoing challenge for me, and I will need to do my own, you know, work around cultural change and perception of different kinds of activations. And I will think, and I'll go back to what I said right at the beginning, which is a lot about community participation and celebration as opposed to passive activation, because I think it is far harder for people to misbehave and it's far harder for people to enforce if they're actually engaged in what they're doing, as opposed to just coming in to experience it or witness it. You know, so it's about how I program as well, how I encourage my team to activate and facilitate the use of the precinct. It's not just for the people doing the hard work of safety and security and policing and so on to change.
It's everything all in together and communicating across industries and across sectors as well. Lisa, did you want to add anything to that, or at this point?
No, it was just, Carla was making me think then about, I suppose, the aesthetics and the feeling of like large scale events and the safety infrastructure that's around them, and how almost dated that feels now in terms of thinking about, you know how hardcore that is. So I think there has to be different ways, and I don't know what the answer is, but there has to be different ways to, you know, get beyond the bag check and the, you know, stay behind the gate type of feeling when you're going to large scale events, and yeah, how we manage them and, you know, how we treat people. And I think, you know, it's, you know, safety and behavior and everything. It's like a civic, you know, agreement between people. And I think once it starts to be taken away, which it does visually in those large scale events, it's people respond in response to that. So I think all of that needs to, you know, be rethought.
Be brought into the conversation, certainly. Thank you, everybody, by the way, who's joining us right now on our conversation about the late night economy, the 24-hour economy. If you have a question, the chat function is just there on the right-hand side, so feel free to ask a question, and we'll throw as many as we can to Lisa, to Kerry, and to Carla as well. You guys are all up for that, I'm assuming, up for some questions. But there are some questions that have come in a little bit earlier. And actually, I think one of these questions, I think in some ways might be great for you, Lisa, to answer, although it is about the Opera House. In fact, there's a number of questions about the Opera House, but it's about big cultural institutions. So one question that came in earlier was, how can we celebrate the Opera House as a resilient and cultural beacon of light for a 24-hour city? I'm interested in hearing the panel's perspective on what the Sydney Opera House can play in this strategy. Can I hear your perspective on that, and maybe you could broaden that out to think about how other of our sort of big important institutions can play in this city? Lisa, your thoughts?
That is a really good question. I suppose I think the Opera House represents so much, broader than even just, you know, a cultural representation. It's like this sort of almost sort of national sort of, well, it's a national sort of icon, isn't it? So I think, you know, how it's activated and programmed and utilised, and, you know, how it welcomes its audiences, I think says very much, you know, should reflect, is the context for, you know, how we experience culture and, you know, civic life. So, you know, I think the work that the Opera House is doing to sort of completely invert how they do the hierarchy of how they do that, I think is not only playing out across all of the cultural institutions, but it's something that's happening, you know, all around the world in terms of how large scale institutions, what their responsibilities are. And, you know, the inverting of the hierarchies of them, and that, you know, that's something that we think about all the time. You know, our voice isn't what is important; it's how we amplify and support the voices of our communities, and you know, the innovation that's around us. And I think, you know, the Opera House has done incredible work around that. And that's something that, you know, we're completely committed to as an institution in terms of our own renewal, is rethinking those hierarchies and, you know, where this institution sits, not only in a, you know, a community hierarchy, but, you know, even rethinking, you know, education and learning, and, you know, not being the sandstone with the authoritative voice, but actually saying our authoritative voice sits within our community, and how do we support that? And I think that's what's happening, and I think it will become more and more visible as, you know, cultural change and generational change happens across these institutions.
Certainly. Kerry, did you want to add anything to that? I thought that was really interesting, this idea of breaking down some of those hierarchies in order to be able to have a community voice. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really loved how Lisa summarized and stated that, and I think that I mean, that really excites me if the leaders of cultural institutions are thinking that way, like Lisa does with her spaces as well. I think finding a way to make the doors open is really important, as in open to everybody. You know, I guess the thing about the Opera House is that it is a global landmark, so it would be wonderful to see that whole forecourt area and space around that precinct really, you know, activated more often than it is. I think the difficulty with the big institutions is that, you know, they're big, so they're expensive to open, and they're big to operate, and you need a certain type of program and content to go into those spaces. So it's not as simple as just, you know, let's throw open the doors and diversify some programming. So yeah, there's a unique challenge there of how to do that. But you know, Lisa will crack it. You know, but one of the things that I have encountered with a number of the Sandstones institutions before is this real push and pull between being open and accessible beyond, you know, your 10 to 5 versus how they do that sustainably, because often those dark hours are utilised to drive commercial revenue that they need, you know. So there is a complex set of push and pulls that need to be worked out to enable those larger spaces to be more participatory in the 24-hour economy, for sure.
Carla, did you want to add anything? Or Lisa?
Sorry. Oh no, I was just thinking. Go Carla.
I've worked at the Opera House twice, so I've got, you know, in 2 different jobs, and I think that what they can do, and large institutions like that, full of amazing people, is thought leadership. That's one really important thing, and there's a fantastic program they're doing right now called Stream, which has been led by the amazing Stuart Buchanan, which is commissioning a really groundbreaking new digital work. So I think thought leadership is a place for those. It has a place in those big institutions with smart people in them, and that's a real job if you're in those places. And then I think Kerry's absolutely right. It's so expensive to do anything in a place like the Opera House or any of the big institutions. It's not an easy place to innovate. So where innovation is done, it does need to be at that kind of level. I think industry leading, sector leading level. No pressure to everyone working in those organisations. I'm thinking about, I guess, while they can't necessarily open up programming completely, I think if there's one lesson that can be taken from the public sector, it's about the place for the EOI, the expression of interest, and actually asking people what they would do if you gave them space. And I don't mean in a closed-off, curated way, because that's what everybody in those organisations is excellent at. I mean remembering to go out to the public and the sector and say, we have this much money, what would you do if we gave it to you? And that's I think important to remember when you're working in those institutions. And I've been guilty of it myself. Oh no, I'll need to curate that. Not always.
Right. So it's almost like don't leave the door open a bit so that
Leave
actually
the door
expression
open.
can happen,
Yeah.
because trying to fit people into a particular box doesn't always mean you get the great
No,
outcomes.
and if there's a lesson I've learned working in local government, is sometimes people come to you with amazing things that you would never have thought of.
And is this something, this kind of leads to another question that came in last week, and thank you for the questions that have come in so far, but it was, I want to ask the panellists their thoughts on the creative economy expanding into Parramatta and the rest of Western Sydney. We've just talked about the Opera House over there, in the city, but what about for opening up spaces and opportunities in Western Sydney and in Parramatta as well? Is this a different, is this kind of approach a suitable way of thinking about it, or what else do you think, Carla?
Oh, there's almost no resemblance.
Between, no.
I mean, there's the eastern part of the city is blessed with infrastructure. The western part of the city is not. So there's very little comparison, I feel, between the two. So trying to take one strategy and apply it elsewhere just doesn't work at all. Gosh, that's a big question. I think, having the powerhouse in Parramatta will be amazing. Frankly, that'll be one big, fantastic institution, and I know, Lisa, that you will bring, a phenomenal amount of culture and art into the city just by dearth of having that fantastic institution. It's about investment in the end. Should I be saying this working in state government now? It's about more investment in programs, and there's a beginning of investment in infrastructure, but it's not just about infrastructure. There needs to be investment in program content. Even if that investment has an expectation of return, even if that's the case, then at least encourage creative and entrepreneurial activity, as opposed to subsidised and funded activity, if I may be so controversial. It doesn't really matter what form the investment takes, as long as there is some more.
Lisa?
Yeah, I totally agree with Carla, and I think it needs to be, strategic, sustained investment to create, an arts and cultural ecology across Western Sydney that, supports everything from the emerging artist to Powerhouse Parramatta. And I think that is, really, really critical. And, I know Create's doing, a lot of work into thinking about, how infrastructure can be expanded across Western Sydney. But I know in terms of Powerhouse Parramatta, what we're trying to do is think about how we embed into that infrastructure that we're creating opportunities for collaboration and for the community to lead in terms of how we program and what we do. So some of the things that we're doing is including 30 residential apartments, so we can bring in artists and scientists and researchers into Parramatta to collaborate with local communities. So thinking about infrastructure or new infrastructure in different ways that can embed self-determined programming and cultural activity, I think is really important. I think the sandstones we exist in were places that were, this museum here in Ultimo was conceived like 30 years ago. The world was completely different then. And so we need to reimagine these buildings in different ways in terms of what they do and what their responsibility is as well. So even here, there was so much unused space across Ultimo. We now have 35 subsidised creative residents and artists utilising spaces, and it has been, it hasn't cost us, it's only brought us incredible contribution and vibrancy to this precinct to have those artists here. So I think thinking about how you utilise and create places,
is certainly part of it. There's a question from Tony that's just come through, which is implementing a 24-hour economy requires sizable support from local business champions. For some councils, this can involve a long-term engagement program to sell the project. So what are some of the best case examples or methods of this. Kerry, is that something that you might be able to speak to, or Carla, perhaps, or Lisa?
I'm sure there's lots of other good examples on local government, but yes, I agree with that 100%. Being a local business owner myself, yeah, you got to find those champions. And with Fringe, that's what we do. We go in and try and find the champions and start there and build in and look at things with a long lens over multiple years, because it takes time. I just throw back to the Live and Local project. I think that's an incredible success around demonstrating to local businesses the value of employing and engaging live music into their spaces. So a little bit of seed funding from local government, a little bit of support from the Live Music Office as far as administrative and curatorial support, and then you watch those kind of those towns really evolve in their presentation of events and their regular programming of live music. So yeah, I'm sure other people have amazing examples as well, but that's just one that I'm a big fan of.
Like a dance party that we're going to go to after 10 o'clock at night, and we're allowed to. Sorry, Kerry, you got interrupted.
No, that's fine. I'd finish.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll ask a couple more questions. Thank you for the ones that have come through on the chat already. I've got pages of them, and so which means people are really engaged in this big conversation. And you know, and the good thing about these kinds of things is that we don't have to have all the answers right now. It is a conversation. There's more that will come, and I know Create New South Wales will continue to have some of these panels that you can talk to. But maybe a couple of the conversations that have come through, if you can answer these, let me know. If you can't, that's okay. But I've sort of talked to regional areas and rural areas as well. So one of the questions was, how can we help, again on councils, but how can we help our councils in rural New South Wales to implement the same support for venues and artists, allowing the much needed ripple effect of live music back into our communities? Carla, what's your thoughts, or is that something Kerry or Lisa would like to talk to as well? Put your hand up, let me know.
I think, I mean, Live and Local, wasn't that was that a Create initiative originally? Someone can, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So
John just said we've got 27 Live and Local projects underway currently. It's a great program.
Yeah.
So,
Live Music Office.
Yeah, thank you. So I think a good idea, and then enabling local councils to deliver that good idea, and having worked in like a couple of different local councils, they don't necessarily have the people to deliver these things. So supporting them, you know, to facilitate that kind of project happening with community. Sorry, that was a bit of a vague answer, but if you haven't got the people in the council to actually do the work, even having the good idea and the money isn't really going to help. And a lot of councils confront that resourcing issue. So it's, you know, you'll find the ones that put their hands up for that money have got enough people in the cultural area to actually do it, which is not, frankly, that common. I think I worked in one or two councils that could actually manage to have a cultural strategy unit in Sydney. So, and, you know, there might be one cultural development officer. So expecting local government to necessarily do it, and maybe it's about doing, coming up with that good idea, and then I suppose making that good idea accessible, and the funding accessible to people in the community and the creative sector as well as in local government. So that's a shared funding. Oh, yeah, cool.
Kerry?
I'm a big advocate of a kind of rejig of our funding model where there's the ability to have a seed funding pool where it's just good ideas from passionate people in communities, because, you know, so often the kind of the systems and process, like the models around seeking funding is so kind of difficult. You have to have proven track record, do all these things, and that's absolutely fair and reasonable because it's public funds. But often in regional towns, and I grew up in the country girl at heart, still go back there a lot. You know, you just want to support that one or two passionate people who have got a great idea and want to do something. And if that's the case, give them the money. I say, just give them the money. You know, and let them run with it, because it's about capacity building as well. And I think we're at a really interesting time, and we've certainly seen since COVID a big exodus to the regions of creative people who are now trying to work with their new communities, or they've gone back home, grew up in the country, and they're starting projects and they're starting ideas. So it would be wonderful, I think, if we could have some type of, more flexible entrepreneurial funding available, where it was about just getting great ideas off the ground in regional communities, because the only way to tackle the deficit within council staffing is to capacity build within the community.
For sure. Which there's another question that came through, Kerry, that kind of talks to that, which is what ideas can you suggest for engaging with creatives in regional areas that may not be used to working with local government? So you sort of almost talked to that. Is there anything you might want to add to that question or that point? Lisa?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think my answer would be, don't wait for local government, because you'll be waiting a long time. If someone who's lived a long time in a regional area, but has also worked for local government, it's sometimes hard. And I was just reflecting as Kerry was talking, like my first break came from the local bus company, the owner of the local bus company, who gave us a space to create like a contemporary art gallery in our local town. And it was because he believed in what we were doing, only because we asked him, that all these other businesses got on board. And I think it's on a local level. For me, it's always been like businesses that have really invested. And that's not to say local government, who I think carries a large part of the can in terms of investing into the local arts economy. I think some of the ways to think about that is not just thinking about arts money, but thinking about the broader local government strategy in terms of what they're trying to deliver, whether it's crime prevention or developing a park, or there's ways that arts and culture can be invested into, intersect with those things and actually leverage money into whatever your idea is.
And looking outside of the sector, looking at other things that have worked in other industries, other possibilities that have been successful, and borrowing or certainly learning from other examples, certainly from other economies and other places as well, is always really useful. We're going to wrap up in a second. Thank you everybody for your amazing questions, and you guys of course are incredible. But there's actually quite a lot of questions here, so I thought we could try and do like a quick fire rapid response unit and see if we can kind of jump through it as much as possible. So are you ready? And if you can't answer it, that's okay, and it might be too big. All right, there's been quite a lot of questions about different things, but I'm gonna save that number 7 for the last, because I think that's really nice. Here we go. This is a tough one for you. How will double vaccination admission be managed? Lisa, I'm going to make you.
Actually, I've read our COVID safe plan about 27 times today through the Service New South Wales app.
So you just have to manage it, basically, is the point. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, Kerry, anything to add there? What about for pop-up events or restaurants or things that are happening in a park, or not just a venue that might have the resources and the staffing to look after it? How is this going to be managed? Anything to add, or Carla?
Well, you will have to have the staffing to manage it. That's really all there is to it.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Is there a way I can get involved in helping improve the nighttime economy without having to have a full-time job in the area of the arts and the creative industries? I work full-time in a different industry now, but I'm passionate about nightlife and I want to get involved and help. Carla?
Oh my God. Well, good on you, and that's fantastic. And if you have a local business organisation that you can get involved in, drive that agenda in your local business organisation, precinct, association, business chamber, advocate, I suppose, for arts and culture within whatever your industry or economic sector or business sector is. And if you own a space, think about letting creatives loose in it. I guess that's my quick answer.
I like that. I think that's good. Anything to add, Kerry or Lisa? Lisa, you're
I
first.
think committing to like one small thing. Like I think, it's all cumulative, and you can advocate. Everyone can advocate from their corner by doing, by
Getting
taking.
involved.
Yeah.
This one, I think I'd love you all just to give, if you could do 10 words or less on this one. Do you expect our art scene to flourish when lockdown ends? Kerry, you're
Yes.
first. It will?
I'm saying yes.
Can
yeah,
you
Lisa.
hear me? Because I'm a bit frozen.
Yeah. I was going to start singing Let It Go, but that would be weird. Yes, Lisa, you say it will flourish when lockdown ends in all its ways.
Totally.
Kerry?
Can you hear
Still
me? Because
frozen.
my screen's frozen.
We can hear you. Yes, we can hear you. Sorry.
And you're not frozen.
Okay, good. I should just talk then. Yes, I say yes, absolutely. There's a couple of things. There is a massive lot of work that has been made over the last 24 to 30 months that hasn't been seen yet. There's a backlog of work, so there's going to be an explosion of work. And I think there will be a renewed sense of optimism for sure. We just need to make sure we've still got the structures in place where those things can be presented.
Carla, your thoughts?
I think I'm probably going to be a bit more tempered than Lisa and Kerry, and I think maybe, but only if we learn some lessons around getting rid of some of the red tape that we've had in place. So, for example, not making people jump through 5 million hoops to get a small grant for something. Like, learn from the lessons of COVID, and also around integrating digital and just making it part of what we do as opposed to thinking about it as a special thing. And I take Kerry's point though about pent up work that can be released when we can actually gather people together again. So I think I'm going to go maybe, but only if we learn some lessons.
Yeah, I absolutely understand. Just in conclusion, I guess when we think about the 24-hour economy and how we can kind of recharge Sydney's creative capital, which is all the things that we've talked about, and how we can put arts and culture, community, local as the sort of the driver for this. I mean, ultimately, what is what are your sort of final kind of big hopes in terms of how we can achieve this? We're getting out of lockdown now. What is your big kind of picture hope that you want to see that maybe you haven't even spoken to yet? So Lisa, just to wrap up, what are your sort of big picture thoughts to see this future through to its conclusion in the best possible way?
Oh, that's a big question.
I know, right?
I hope that we don't go back to business as usual. I hope that there's some sort of some reflection that brings some actual real structural change or difference. And I'm not sure, I don't know if I can fully articulate what that is, but I hope we've done this for a purpose, with purpose. Not very articulate is my answer.
But the opportunity is there. So Kerry, your final thoughts? This the opportunity that we have in front of us. What are we looking at, and what can we look forward to?
Yeah, I echo Lisa's comments. As long as we don't go back to a business as usual, back to normal mode, I hope that we can look forward to government agencies who have a yes can do attitude like they have been doing in the COVID recovery. I think if we can maintain a facilitation as opposed to regulation attitude, then we're in a good stead for success.
Sure, certainly. Carla, your thoughts?
I think the use of our outdoor spaces to improve our facilitation of infrastructure in our outdoor spaces, and to facilitate more programs and for people to do more creative things in our public spaces. I think we made a good start with what they call the Place Design and Public Spaces team within the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. There's a mouthful. They've made a fantastic start at it, and I think it's about embedding creatives in the design of those spaces. So I want to start right from the very, 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 very beginning when they're being redeveloped, and then all the way through to continuing to deliver stuff in our parks and public domain, and enabling community to do that as well. That's my big hope.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to how this begins and starts to play out as the lockdown ends. And I hope everybody's been keeping safe and well wherever you happen to be across this gorgeous state and across Sydney too, because, all the love in the world to everybody. It's been a tough 100 plus days. And we're almost out of it. And I know with these incredible leaders at the helm and everybody else, of course, on this panel who've been part of and will continue to be part of this conversation, that we are looking towards a positive future. So thank you to you, Lisa, to you, Kerry, and to you, Carla, for your contributions and your thoughts. And yeah, my name's Fenella Kernebone. I know Create New South Wales will have all the information that you could possibly imagine and need up on their website for Create New South Wales. And I thank you all for your questions and for your comments on the chat and for everything that's been sent through beforehand. It's been a delight hearing and learning about some of the big picture stuff that's to come. And I can't wait to visit every single one of your places and see what's happening and have that glass of wine or a cup of tea, whatever it is that we choose to, and a bowl of noodles, outside, inside, in the development, doesn't matter, wherever we happen to be in our 24-hour economy. So thank you, Carla, thank you, Kerry, and thank you, Lisa. You guys are great.
Thanks, Fenella. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching. See you later. Bye.